never once cried.
But he sure does have a lot of requests for the judge in his case.
Confidential jail visits? Who is he talking to? Could one of those visitors be someone that he had an affair with?
Is Chris Watts actually worried about a media frenzy?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, I'm not sure if Chris Watts was so worried about a media frenzy. I mean, he has spoken to a lot of people ever since the plea deal. He hasn't shut up. So I don't think it was Chris Watts who was worried about a media frenzy. I think it was someone else, and probably not who most people think. I think it was Anadarko, because Anadarko was being wooed for a multi-billion-dollar deal with one of the majors, which was subsequently, the deal was subsequently sealed just the following year, right? So it would make sense to make this bad publicity go away in the face of this multi-billion-dollar deal. The more attention that the case got meant the more attention the well side got, and the more attention the well side got would mean the more attention Anadarko would get. And none of it was good attention. It is what was going on in the workplace, what were the safety standards, did they not have an idea what their own employees were doing? And that's a conversation that I expected to come up, certainly at trial, is the safety issues, the surveillance of this big oil company. And of course, the oil company didn't intend to exist much longer. Anadarko didn't really plan on being around. They planned to sort of, sell everything and get out of Dodge, right? But I do think overall the thing that is circling right now, which is this idea of don't say anything, be quiet. Let's have silence on the Watts case. Let's have nobody talking about the Watts case. I think it's quite an interesting thing as a concept to talk about on its own. It is quite funny that you have some creators out there who are putting up videos about why we shouldn't be talking about the Watts case, and they are then talking about the Watts case, right? I also find it really strange, and I don't think it belongs in true crime, the number of creators who spend most of their time talking about other people absolutely unrelated to the crime and other creators. This one did this one said that. Even if someone who's spoken to Chris Watts, whatever, it's not really going to give you any information. So what, you had someone who spoke directly to Chris Watts, it's interpreting that information. And, especially from someone who's an inmate, you're not going to be getting any amazing insights. And so what I want to talk about in this episode is an interesting aspect given the silence, given these sort of ideas that, we don't want to talk about the Chris Watts case. We need to be respectful. We need to move on. Everything's been dealt with. And in that particular area, I think something that is quite interesting is the fact that Shanann's Facebook page was left public. And you might say, no one could do anything about it. Well, it was changed from public to private in January 2020, around about the exact time the Lifetime movie came out. So as soon as the Lifetime movie came out, it was like a switch was flicked, and suddenly you couldn't access Shanann's Facebook page the way you could. And I wrote a blog post on SHAKEDOWN title. It was published on the 28th of September. So, at least a month and a half after Shanann passed, saying that her Facebook profile is still public. And if you think about it now, it is really strange, interesting, weird that was allowed to happen. And what do you think? Why do you think the profile was allowed to remain public, meant to stay public? Because we know it's changed and we know that they could change it, but why do you think it stayed public? What do you think is the reason for that? So for people who were curious about the Watts case, if they wanted to know pretty much all there was to know behind the scenes, well, they would go to Shanann's Facebook page, and there it all was. Endless photos of the family, videos and so on, but invariably Thrive spiel. So whenever Shanann was talking, she was trying to promote Thrive. So if you were sort of going to Shanann's Facebook page to find out about this person, find out about the family, find out about Chris Watts, find about sort of go into the home and get a sense of what was going on, you were sort of bombarded with Thrive. You know, this is what you need to do. Every single video was about that. Every photo sort of had a Thrive patch in it. And the result was that, you know, you had thousands, if not millions of people going to Shanann's Facebook page because of the incident on August 13th, only to have all of these people sort of exposed to the sales pitch, the multi-level marketing. And someone who was sort of quite involved in this case, quite a few people that I knew, readers, just people that I knew who were paying attention to the case, would come to me later and say, oh, you know what, I tried Thrive. And I think that was the point. The point of leaving the page open was this sort of idea that this case has got massive publicity. Well, now you can sort of get massive market share out of that, right? And I'm not going to put up those images here, but I'm sure many of you know that Shanann, in her absence, achieved that 200,000K milestone, and they're pictures of people holding up the board, sort of celebrating that. And I think you've got to balance this whole idea of sort of victimology and you know, please don't talk about this case, with the other side, which is, well, we want to leave the profile open because, again, I think you've got to ask this question. I think you've got to say, if Shanann could be here with us right now, and if Shanann could have been with us in August and September 2018, knowing what was already happening, knowing how people were going through those photos and videos, what do you think she would have wanted? Right? And quite a simple way of thinking about it is, imagine if it was you. Imagine if you were kind of out of the equation, right? You were no longer here, and but your Facebook was still out there and everyone was talking about it, right? What would your wishes be regarding that, right? And some people might actually say, I would want people to know what happened, right? I would want people to, I don't want there to be any secrets. I want people to know, I want there to be justice in what happened to me. Some people might say that, but someone else might say, you know, in the context of what's happened, I don't want you to see what is really going on. I want to do this or I want to do that. I don't want people to know. You know, I don't want people to be going there, not trying to buy Thrive, but for some other reason, right? And I think just an ordinary precedent in this is, I've seen it so often, I think many of you have as well. As soon as something happens, as soon as there's foul play, you have social media instantly being scrubbed, instantly set to private. We've seen it in the Morphew case, but you see it all the time. As soon as there's an incident, then suddenly people try and get rid of their social media because they don't want people to know really what is going on with them. And this is something that's been going on for quite a while. You know, Amanda Knox had a MySpace page. There are just so many examples of social media that could have provided a lot of information but then is removed subsequently. And what we often forget is for example, now you might think, if you're new to the Watts case, you might think that Shanann's Facebook was always sort of private. If you went there now, you might think, oh, it was like that always. But, it was public in as late as September 2018. And so in the sense that some people were going there out of curiosity, there were other people who were going there almost as investigators, trying to get information, trying to get images for their YouTube videos, trying to get a sense of, what was really going on kind of behind the scenes. Because bear in mind, we didn't have the discovery. So people were kind of using this social media as discovery. And what made it quite incredible was the sheer amount of content that was out there. Shanann was posting videos virtually every day, lots of photos virtually every day. And so you got a sort of a narrative out of that. You could also see the change in Chris Watts's appearance from the one year to the next. And it actually went on for years. It wasn't just 2018 social media or 2017. It went back 2016. There was really a lot to go through. And so I think the one thing that is, as I say, interesting is that it was public for as long as it was. But I think the other thing that's interesting is when it went private, when it was no longer accessible. And that changed in 2020, which is essentially something like 18 months later, almost a year and a half afterwards, it was decided, okay, now let's set it to private. And then not that long after that, the Netflix film came out, which sort of used Shanann's social media to tell her story. And so you had the Facebook going kind of private, but nevertheless being given to a specific vendor, right? I think if you were going to take this position of please don't talk about this case, please move on or whatever, talk about another true crime case, or, there's a certain time limit, please talk about this case for a certain amount of time, then stop, then go to another true crime case or something. I don't know what the idea is, but, if you think about that aspect, if you think about this sort of need for privacy, and we also don't want a trial, and you put on the other side of that the Facebook that is just remaining public month after month after month, what do you think about that? Then the other thing I think that's worth mentioning, just in terms of sort of noise and silence, right? So there's been a lot of noise in this case, especially associated with conspiracy theorists and all that kind of thing. And then there's been Nicole Kessinger's silence. It's actually been extraordinary. The depth of her silence has been almost matched by the cacophony of noise and speculation about her, right? So I think that's certainly another interesting kind of mismatch, this weird contradiction that's been going on. And then just to come back to Anadarko, I've always felt that there have been certain powerful people that didn't want this case to go to trial. I think there were other people who also didn't want the case to go to trial for their own reasons. And Chris Watts just ended up playing into that whole thing. But I think what's really interesting is Anadarko, their sort of position. Because we know in retrospect, in the same way we know when Shanann's Facebook was switched over, we know, and that talks a little bit about the intentions of whoever was behind that. And in the same way, we sort of know when Anadarko switched over. We know that Anadarko was being wooed by Chevron and Occidental Petroleum, and they eventually, sold out for something like 36 billion, but they could have lost 5 billion, 10 billion, whatever it was. They could have lost a huge amount of brand value if it was a scenario, well, this is going to be a long, ruinous trial, and Anadarko will be put on trial. And the things like their staffing arrangements and things going on in the workplace would be put on trial, and just general things like their safety protocols or lack of would be put on trial. And people in Colorado would be thinking about set-offs and fracking and safety in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have been, and that would all have consequences in terms of the value of this company. And it's really ironic all this time later how things have sort of panned out. You've had the pandemic happening, which has hemorrhaged the oil industry in a big way, and then also it's saddled Occidental, the company that bought Anadarko, with a lot of debt. And now there's all this talk about wanting to go over to renewables, wanting to take off the whole fossil fuel thing off the energy agenda. And so if you think about all the sound and fury going on in the background with Anadarko, and then ultimately, also if Occidental could have looked into a crystal ball and seen into the future, do you think they would have bought Anadarko after all? I don't think they would have, because they are going to really struggle in the market conditions that we're going into now to recover. I have heard talk that the oil price is going to do very well, but I'm just saying in general the industry is moving in another direction, and so in that respect it may not have been the best bet. What's also interesting is Chevron got a $1 billion sort of almost like, what do they call it? Almost like booby prize, not a booby prize, consolation prize. They got a $1 billion fee for the fact that Anadarko had sort of agreed to go with them and then rescinded that deal. So just by entering into negotiations with Chevron, Chevron ended up getting $1 billion. So there were huge interests at play going on in the background. And I think when you understand, and this is just something that you don't hear any YouTubers talking about, I don't know if it's because the average YouTuber creator, I'm speculating, I don't know if it's because the average YouTuber isn't very well educated, isn't very well, they don't know too much about economics or the corporate side of things, and they just want to pander to a gullible audience. They want to tell the audience sort of things that they want to hear that are salacious but untrue, but nevertheless that's going to interest the audience. I don't know. It's just been very weird for me that Anadarko hasn't really come up, and I did deal with that in my book, The Rape of Cassandra. I dealt with that, and there's definitely some very interesting workplace scenario stuff regarding Anadarko that would have been very interesting if it had come out at trial. I don't think Anadarko would have used the word interesting, but there were definitely some legal things at issue that they probably wouldn't have wanted the spotlight of a high-profile case to sort of bring to light. And of course, Weld County, I mean, the whole of Colorado does have their output is very largely in this fossil fuels area, but particularly Weld County. The taxes, the income they were getting was from one particular industry, and guess what this crime was the epicenter of. Now, there is sometimes an important reason to be quiet about a crime, and from the law enforcement perspective and a prosecution perspective, you want to hold the cards close to your chest and give the suspect the sense that the danger is past, and get them to start making mistakes and losing the tight grip or control they've got on whatever they're doing, and then build your case against them. So that's totally different. That is silence with a strategic intent in order to get that person later on, right? That's not really what we're talking about here. I think what we're talking about here is, I think they call it muzzling, where you just, for your own particular reasons, you just don't want someone to talk about something. I think another case to sort of contrast that with, which is quite a weird contrast, is the Madeleine McCann case, where the parents sort of felt, we want justice for Madeleine, we want bumper to bumper coverage of her every single day, newspaper headlines. We don't want people to forget about Madeleine. We want people to think there's always hope. We want people to continue the search for Madeleine. We don't want it to ever stop. And so there you have a completely different approach, which is quite interesting, wouldn't you say? Then another aspect that I found quite interesting and quite troubling was also the way Ashley Banfield, who I certainly was going to every day, I thought that her coverage was pretty amazing. She was actually getting hold of teachers and friends and classmates, and some of them were misfires, like Trent Bolt going onto the show, but overall was very watchable and was very interesting what was going on, right? And only to have her taken off the air. And she was taken off the air, I think, in sort of October. So within a couple of weeks of the trial, of the sentencing, and the announcement of the plea deal, she was just sort of taken off the air. And I sort of wondered if there was more to it than that. They said it was just the idea that they wanted more political type coverage at HLN. But it seemed to me very weird that you would take someone off America's most high-profile case, which was probably getting a lot of traction and a lot of viewers, and HLN had captured that sort of market, and it's still going on today. I mean, it is still a very large market of people who are obsessed about this case almost 3 years later, right? And so the idea that you would take Ashley Banfield off it right in the beginning when she was totally sort of all over it, an absolute expert, you would have expected her to be in documentaries and so on, as a reporter. And, I think she's also got a bit of legal background. She would have been an absolute, the de facto commentator about this case. And instead, what happened? So if you're interested, I wrote a blog post about this. Shanann Watts' Facebook profile is still public and what it could mean on Shakedown on the 28th of September. I said 45 days after the incident, Shanann's Facebook page, which was completely open to the public, is still completely open. I said this is unprecedented in a high-profile true crime case. It means anyone who wants to poke around through her life, looking inside her home, looking at her family and friends, can still do so. And people have. One 30-minute video posted by Shanann has already been viewed over 140,000 times, and that was in September. It was ultimately viewed something like just under 300,000 times. But I think videos that were taken of the social media have gone on to have millions of views. In any event, as part of my research into the two-faced narratives, I started noticing comments alongside these videos, including from key figures in this case, such as Nicole Atkinson, not from several weeks prior, but posted in recent days. And then I highlighted some of that in the blog post. I said, everything posted on Facebook, including photos and videos, are matters of public record. Anything you say alongside those photos and videos could be used in a court of law, especially accusations and allegations. There have already been suggestions. I'm not going to talk about that part. It's doubtful specific members of the public could be held liable, but what could happen is Chris Watts' defense may claim his right to privacy has been violated continuously, indiscriminately, and excessively. So, this thing of leaving Shanann's Facebook open, Chris Watts could even have used as a possible legal defense that this was sort of favoring her, right? Now, we may not care about his rights, but we ought to care about the issue in a general sense. And so I said in September, how would Shanann feel if she was still alive, knowing her life was on display? How would she feel about that? How do you feel about giving up access to your online identity? Would you? If she could speak, would Shanann still want her social media open and exposed? And then I sort of went on just to say, who has authorized her page to remain public and why? I don't think there's much mystery around that. The other thing that I then went into is the experience I had right in the beginning of my true crime career. Someone I knew on Facebook was a victim, and I then wrote about her story. And it's quite a famous case. It's the Oscar Pistorius case, probably South Africa's version of the O.J. Simpson trial. And I happen to know the victim on Facebook. And I just felt like her story was never told. And something similar happened there, although I think it's different to Shanann. I don't know if her people close to her knew that much about social media. And in any event, Reva's page was set to private very soon after the incident. And so if you're interested in that story, you can go to the blog post. I'll put a link in the description. I also wrote a book about basically her social media, telling her story in her words in my very first book, Reva in Her Own Words. And so that's why I sort of felt I had some experience in this area going into the Chris Watts case. And I was really surprised just by how long, month after month after month after month after month, Shanann's Facebook remained public. So I'm not going to take it any further than that. I have quoted this particular blog post a little bit out of order, so it's chronologically not the next one. I just thought it was quite a topical blog post to highlight. I have got to tell you that I'm feeling just quite run down by the nasty comments and just things that I don't feel like I deserve on YouTube. And whenever that happens, I either post less or I just move it over to Patreon, because it tends to be a dampener on your day. And so there's just been quite a lot of people making really nasty comments directed, I think, towards me and my channel that I don't think are valid or necessary. And I don't really feel like I need to deal with them. And so I'm really considering moving this series onto Patreon if this goes on. What I want to, I know it's also not many of you, it's a couple of people who probably don't know me and who are responding to what they think is going on. But nevertheless, it's not fun for me. Bear in mind, this Sunday I'll be doing a live on the topic of managing your fear, and I think that's going to be quite an interesting subject just to talk about in different respects, but also in terms of the Watts case. So look out for that, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.